Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining Headfirst to talk about college recruiting during coronavirus. With everything going on, there's a lot of impacts on the recruiting space. So we're going to talk mainly about how this is impacting college baseball recruiting and also what student athletes can be doing right now to continue to advance their recruiting even during this turbulent time. Before we dive in, some quick introductions. I am Max McKenna. I'm our Senior Manager of Marketing. I went to Amherst College where I graduated in 2011, played baseball there for 4 years, went from there into teaching for 3 years, first at Phillips Andover Academy up in Massachusetts, where I was an assistant baseball coach and history instructor, and then moved down to a school just north of the Bronx in New York, a small private school called the Masters School, where I taught history and was the head baseball coach for a couple of years. In college, I interned for Headfirst for 2 years in the honor roll camps division. Came back full time nearly 6 years ago. At 6 years ago recently, back to Headfirst full time, and have really been working very closely with this division, with our showcases over that time. And thank you all for being on here tonight. I will say, as with most people around the country, we are working from home. So if you do hear a dog whine or bark in the background, my dog Jenny appreciates your patience and understanding, and I'll try to make sure that we minimize that over the course of the evening.
Great. And my name is Kevin Keene. I am the Associate of Marketing at Headfirst, reporting to Max. I graduated from NYU in 2017. Before that, I actually attended Honor Roll Camp in 2012. I was recruited to play baseball at Dickinson College before transferring to NYU. During my time there, I got to intern with Headfirst twice. I also spent some time with the Brooklyn Nets basketball operations department. I rejoined Headfirst on a full-time basis in October of 2018. Working with marketing with Max, focused on our showcase events.
You know, it is interesting. On the webinar tonight specifically, there are the only two-time interns that Honor Roll has ever had are both on here. So I feel incredibly fortunate to be here. I hope that you all do as well, the people who are tuning in. So to take a look at the agenda of what we're going to be talking about this evening, as I mentioned, it's really going to focus around these first two bullets. We're going to talk about the impact that coronavirus has had on certainly the college athletic season, but also more specifically on the recruiting process at especially some of the high academic schools that we work with. And we're going to dedicate a bulk of the evening to that. We're also going to spend a lot of time talking about what student athletes can do, because I think that is where we have a lot of questions from families right now is, it's a dead period. My season's been suspended. What can I be doing right now to still make strides in my recruiting? So we're going to focus a lot on that and giving you guys some good next steps and guidance on between now and whenever this clears up and whenever I can get back on the field playing some baseball, what can I do to set myself up for when that time comes? We're also going to, towards the end of the night, touch on some additional resources. We are not the be-all, end-all in terms of knowledge about recruiting or Division I baseball or scholarships or Division III baseball or anything else. So we're going to talk about some additional resources to put you in touch with. And then we're going to do as much live Q&A as there are questions. So again, if you have a question, fire it away. Kevin's going to be collecting those over the course of the evening, and we'll be saving those towards the end. If you have a specific question that is very tailored to your student athlete or your own recruiting process, feel free to send it in. We might reach out to you separately, either via chat tonight or via email or phone over the coming days and weeks, just to make sure that the questions that we cover tonight on the webinar are more broadly applicable and really cover the ground that everybody here needs us to walk to make sure that we're getting everything answered. So first up, impacts so far on the recruiting process. So we did a webinar a couple weeks ago for travel coaches and high school coaches in baseball. And at that point, it was late March, and there were still some pending NCAA Division I council decisions about eligibility, roster waivers, and scholarship waivers. Since we did that webinar, these decisions have come down, or at least have started to come down, and they have some important effects on current student athletes at the college level, but also carry some ramifications for the recruiting process for the class of 2020s, 2021s, and younger as we kind of move through. So the first and most significant thing that the NCAA did was they granted an eligibility extension for all spring student athletes in the for this season. So any student athlete, whether they were their freshman, junior, senior, whatever, they have an extra year of eligibility because the NCAA season was suspended. This carries ramifications later on in terms of the size of recruiting classes, what this might mean for the future of recruiting at some of these programs that we'll certainly touch on. The other thing that the NCAA has decided is in Division I baseball specifically, there's a roster cap of 35 student athletes in a program. And that's a hard cap. That's the maximum. No program can go over that. For 2021, because they extended this year of eligibility to the class of 2020. So a college senior can come back next year. That returning senior who has this extra year of eligibility will not count against the roster cap. So, for example, TCU that has 9 seniors on it, if all 9 seniors come back, their effective roster cap jumps from 35 to 44. The roster cap in a given program will expand by the number of seniors who have this additional year of eligibility who come back for 2021. And we can certainly talk about, what's going to incentivize student athletes to come back for that 5th year or why they might not, or all those other shifting pieces. But it is really important to note that right now, the understanding that we have of this is that this roster waiver, this capacity waiver on the roster limit is for 1 year only. And so it only apply to the class to next season. And while the eligibility was extended to all 4 years of current college student athletes, this roster cap waiver so far has only been extended for 2021. There is still the potential and possibility that this will open up to a 2 or 3 year waiver as it goes with the NCAA, although I don't necessarily expect it to personally. But this waiver is really important for the committed class of 2020. And then we can talk about some of the second order effects that come from these first 2 bullet points. The other thing is in a fully funded baseball program, a Division I baseball program can give out 11.7 scholarships with a minimum of giving 25% to a specific player. They can only have 27 players on their roster who are on scholarship. So 35 kids, 11.7 scholarships, and 27 of the 35 can be on scholarship. Similar to the eligibility extension of the roster cap waivers, this year's seniors who return for 2021 will not count. Their scholarships will not count towards this 11.7 limit, and it also will not count for the 27 counters, as they call it, in recruiting. So if you're returning a senior who is on 50% scholarship, that 0.5 scholarship will not take out from the 11.7. So it's 11.7 across the incoming freshmen through next year's seniors. Any of the class of 2020 who reclass or do something different academically to stick around for another year, they will not count against this, against any of these caps for the 2021 season. Another important note here is that although eligibility was extended across all NCAA divisions, Division I, II, and III, Division I is in a more unique spot because it has these limits on scholarships, it has the roster cap, and it has this 27 counters. In Division III, they do not have a roster cap. Division II, they do not have a roster cap. Also in Division III, there's no scholarships, so the budgeting and the financial side of it certainly looks different for those student athletes as well. So those are kind of the NCAA decisions that have come down and are to some degree still in development, but the major parts of them have been decided with a late March, early April decision. I believe it came down and was kind of publicly known on April 1st. Now, what are the impacts of these things? The impacts, and I kind of split this into 2 different groups, committed student athletes and then uncommitted student athletes. For committed student athletes in the 2020 class, they have a signed National Letter of Intent, or NLI. This, in the NCAA's eyes, is a binding document for the school and for the student athlete. So the integrity and the bindingness, so to speak, of this NLI is, from my perspective, I think a really big part of why the NCAA did extend a waiver and an allowance beyond the 35-man roster, beyond the 11.7 scholarships for 2021. These schools, the NCAA partner schools, had already committed in a binding fashion to student athletes in the 2020 class. They had already said, you are coming to this campus in the fall, you have a scholarship, you have a spot on the roster. To take that away would have been not really feasible from the perspective of the NLI because it is a binding document. And so that is, to me, a huge part of why the NCAA decided to make this waiver on the roster cap and on the scholarship, counting these current seniors towards the 11.7 scholarships. The class of 2021s who have not reached, they might have a verbal commitment. They're very important and a foundational part of the recruiting process, but 2021s have not yet reached the early signing period. They do not have a signed national letter of intent. And as such, the NCAA does not recognize verbal commitments as binding. And so this is where you could see some more of the impact of this, roster crunch over the next couple of years, where rosters are a little bit bigger because more kids are sticking around. Do coaches try to balance this out in their 2021 recruiting class? Kind of remains to be seen. But because the 2021s are only a verbal commitment and that is not recognized officially by the NCAA, and they do not regulate those in the same way, it could be impacted more so than the class of 2020. One thing that we talk about is a verbal commitment is a handshake deal, and so it requires a lot of trust and a depth of relationship with the coach. That hasn't really changed. It's just there might be more pressure on some coaches to break some of these verbal commitments, or student athletes to break some of these verbal commitments, just depending on how the situation develops next, certainly this summer, and then next season and through next spring into that, when those 2021s will arrive on campus in the fall of 2021. Now, the impacts on uncommitted 2021s, 22s, 23s, those of you who are reaching the peak in the heart of your recruiting cycle or just getting started, there could be impacts from these NCAA decisions on these classes as well who have not yet committed. The two main ones you see there, especially at the Division I level, revolve around roster size and scholarship availability. As we mentioned, all student athletes this spring have the ability to take that an extra year of eligibility. So this year's freshmen could still be around in 4 years. They still have 4 years of eligibility because the season was suspended. So the kind of carry along effects of this eligibility could last for a handful of years. And so a 2021, 22, 23 who commits to a school, shows up on campus, could be walking into a place where there are more kids sticking around over the course of those years. But if that NCAA waiver on the 35-man cap has expired, there might be issues with the roster size that coaches and individual programs will need to be balancing out over the next few years to make sure that they are staying within the guidelines of the NCAA. Hand in hand with this is scholarship availability. Just as the roster cap waiver right now covers the 2021 season, so does the scholarship waiver. So a 2021, 22, 23 who are approaching this, they will again be held to the 11.7 scholarship limit. And so coaches will be constrained. There might be fewer scholarship dollars available just depending on what their program is doing. Now, a lot of this is going to depend on how many kids in any given program decide to take advantage of and use that extra year of eligibility, which is going to vary drastically on a case-by-case basis from different players, different programs, different situations. For example, one place in which this will not impact roster size or certainly scholarship availability as well is the Ivy League. First of all, because the Ivy League doesn't have scholarships. Division I programs, but do not have scholarships. Now, the other thing is unique to the Ivy League. They do not allow graduate transfers. They do not allow graduate student athletes to be on rosters for sports. And even though their current seniors could theoretically be a graduate student within their own program, they are not allowing that. They have come out and said, we understand that this has been extended to all student athletes for this past spring, but our Ivy League rules have not changed. So we still will not allow graduate transfers or graduate students on our rosters. So even though those kids have an extra year, they cannot use it at an Ivy League school. So Ivy League rosters will essentially be, and incoming recruiting classes will essentially function as they have been planned because it's been disallowed by the league. Some key takeaways for all of these recruiting impacts. And these are two things. I think that it's worth noting that even though these changes and potential impacts and decisions from the NCAA feel like they could be a huge impact on the recruiting scene, the two things that we list here as the key takeaways are really changes in a matter of degree, not a categorical shift in what we're seeing or how you're going about the recruiting process. Key takeaways are focus on holistic fit when you are looking for a college. This has been true forever in the way that we talk to student athletes and talk to families about the college search process and the recruiting process. But what this pandemic and coronavirus and a 2020 season suspension has really brought to a sharper point is the baseball season is not guaranteed. Whether it's an injury or a global pandemic or whatever, baseball is going to come to an end. And ultimately, the decision that you make in the recruiting process has to be an academic decision and a decision based around holistic school fit, not just on this piece of the puzzle or this piece of the puzzle, but how the whole thing looks once it's put together. More important than ever, because rosters could be bigger. You could be asked to redshirt. You could end up walking onto a roster that's bigger than 35 and the coach has to make some cuts, or you're not walking into the same scholarship availability that you thought you were, or the same guaranteed roster spot. Baseball is not guaranteed. We encourage student athletes to think about the holistic fit of the school, and that is ultimately what will set you up for the best four-year experience in college. But then when the cleats come off the last time, how has your college selection process set you up for success then? Whether it's after high school and there isn't the college opportunity for you, or it's after 4 years of college or 5 years of college or a 20-year pro career, how does your college experience set you up for the next step that you are taking in your career? And how does the thinking about it as a holistic school experience is what I would argue sets you up for success both during the 4 years, but then also well after as well. The other piece of this is student athletes have to arrive on campus ready to compete for a spot. You're on a team, you're with teammates, but there's no bones about it. You are competing for a spot with the other incoming freshmen and with the kids who are already on the roster. So if you're a 2020 and you're walking onto a roster that instead of being 35 people is 40, this doesn't change that you are competing for a spot. It just puts a little sharper point on it, right? It's a little bit more competition than you might have expected, but it doesn't categorically change what you are doing when you arrive on campus in September. You are arriving to show the coach what you have, earn and compete for a spot, full stop. That doesn't change. It's just maybe the amount of competition that you'll see over the next couple of years from recruiting classes, upperclassmen who are sticking around for an extra year, transfers who are looking for a different baseball experience because they got frozen out of what they were looking for at the school that originally signed with, etc. You'll face more competition, maybe, especially at some of these high-level Division I schools, but that doesn't change what you're doing, which is being the best that you can be, proving to the coach and to the coaching staff that you can contribute to the program, and then really making an impact on that program over the course of the fall leading into the spring.
Max, before we move on, we have been getting a couple of questions about this whole extra year of eligibility. One in particular was, is there a given time period for anyone that's getting that extra year, whether it's someone who's going to be a fifth-year senior or a freshman who might want to take that fifth year later? Do they have a time period where they need to decide this?
My understanding is that there is not. It is just automatically granted to all current student athletes. So if you're a freshman right now and you have this extra year of eligibility, you just have it. You don't have to go through any paperwork or claim it or say, oh, I'm going to use this extra year of eligibility now. I think you can just kind of talk with your coach and take this year at the back end of your college experience. An important piece of this, though, is that conversation with the coach. And we're already seeing this at some programs that we work with and others where programs, the NCAA has granted eligibility to all spring student athletes, but that doesn't mean that every program has to do that in the same way. They've given a lot of discretion to the programs, especially because of the budgeting impacts of this. If you are carrying an extra 3 scholarships in your senior class, and all of a sudden the athletic department's thinking, across all my spring sports, that that money starts to add up from a budgeting standpoint. And so some programs and some schools will kind of counsel their seniors out and say, look, yes, you have this year of eligibility. You can come back. I don't have a guaranteed roster spot. I don't have scholarship money for you just based on the situation in the athletic department. So, or there's also a lot of other reasons that kids might not take advantage of this fifth year. One of the most important ones being, especially at the high academic schools that we work with at Honor Roll Camp, they have a job waiting for them. They have a job at Goldman Sachs where they can, start making a pretty good salary and enter the next phase of their careers, or they can stick around for a fifth year, pay tuition for an additional year to play another year of baseball. And so it's kind of, there's some budgeting math that goes into it on the college level, but also on the family level, and just thinking about what the trade-off is between moving on to what is next for you as a student athlete after college, or taking advantage of this great experience of playing an additional year of college baseball. Any other questions, Kevin, that came in that you want to cover now?
Yeah, Max, one other one that just came in. I mean, we've said that, there's going to be a lot of ripple effects from this, and I think everyone is still trying to pinpoint a lot of them. We are focused kind of on the current high school classes. Do we anticipate that these changes might go into the class of 2024 as well?
Theoretically, you could. Yes. I mean, because this year's freshmen, the freshmen in college, the class of 2024, have that extra year of eligibility, it could. My suspicion is that over the next couple years, the roster size issue, the scholarship availability will be most acute next year. So for the 2020 to 2021 school year and season. But then that roster size issue, especially, and that scholarship availability issue, is resolved by this waiver. I think that after that point, you'll see coaches start to normalize and recruit their 2021s, 22s, 23s with some inkling of what kids might take advantage of the fifth year, what their scholarship availability is going to look like. So I think it will kind of work its way through the system. It will completely work its way through the system over the next 4 years, but I think that you'll see the impact start to lessen each year, just in terms of that roster crunch that you'll see. Another thing that will impact this, technically unrelated, but has a big impact, is the MLB draft. The MLB draft and the NCAA baseball governing bodies have, they don't have any relation to each other officially, but the changes to the draft this year, where it's a minimum of 5 rounds, I'd expect we'll see somewhere between 5 and 10 rounds maybe. And next year, there's a minimum of 20 rounds. That's shorter than the 40-round draft. And so fewer kids are going to be picked up out of college and signed to pro contracts and move on. This means that fewer seniors, fewer eligible juniors and sophomores will move on and leave college rosters for pro ball, because fewer of them will be drafted. So as the draft normalizes over the next couple of years, you will also see that volume of kids who are leaving especially from these Power 5 schools, from the Dukes and the Vanderbilts and the Mississippi States. You'll see more of those kids move along to the pro ranks in a way that you had seen previously, where there is attrition every year, not just with kids graduating, but with kids moving through the draft as well. The draft impact, the scholarship issues, the roster size caps, these do impact some of our programs. I mean, 2 programs that I just mentioned, Duke and Vanderbilt, attend our camps. Stanford gets kids drafted every year, come to our camps. It is less acute at some of these high academic programs based on the level of the player in their program, who are less likely to be a top 5, 10-round pick. But also because these are the schools that are looking at the college experience as, setting Max McKenna up for what comes after college, not maximizing the value of the student athlete while he's with them there. So that kind of difference of focus at some of these schools, I think, is something that you'll see impact some of these high academic programs less over the next 3 or 4 years as well.
Great. Max, I'm going to lump 2 more questions here together that are kind of related. So one of them about redshirting in baseball. We all hear the term a lot for football when we're watching it on TV. How common is that with baseball? And then kind of on a similar vein there, not redshirting, but taking a gap year or a PG year before entering college. Are these common things with baseball? Do we expect to see more of it in the next couple of years?
So I'll answer the second part of that first. Do I expect to see more of it over the next couple of years? I think yes. Um, I think that a post grad year is becoming a more mainstream thing to do. Previously, it was really, I heard about it most in hockey. Now I hear it about a lot in baseball, basketball, like other sports as well. So I do think that given the potential for roster overflow over the next couple of years, I think some college coaches will say, hey, Kevin, we do have a spot for you, but it's not in the 2021 class. It's in the 2022s. I'm going to put you in touch with a post grad program that I work with at Phillips Andover or Phillips Exeter or IMG, whatever. And you're going to reclass and then come in as a freshman the year after that. And so you could see more of that. I also think that driven by the student athlete, you might see more of it. Just as these things work their way through the system, you might think I need another year to develop and get more competitive on the field so that I can be in a better place to get the roster spot, the scholarship money, the academic profile to hit some of my academic reach schools in the next recruiting cycle instead of in this one. Redshirting, taking a post grad year, they are fairly common and becoming more common, I would argue, in the recruiting space and in the baseball space. I think that it is still independent of any kind of recruiting space wide shifts or trends, it is still an individual decision. And for a kid next year, it might be the right fit for one kid, might not be for another, the same way that it might have been the right fit for a kid 2 years ago and wouldn't have been the right fit for a different kid 2 years ago. It needs to be considered on a case by case basis. There's a lot of really good reasons to take a PG year, academic development, maturity, on physical and baseball development. There's a lot of really good reasons to do it, and there's a lot of really good post grad programs across the country. But it's still an individual and one-off decision, I think, that you need to consider, where you can't say, for every kid in the 2022 class, because there's going to be a roster crunch, doing a PG year is the right thing to do, or committing and then redshirting is the right thing to do. I think it's still very much a case by case basis, and student athletes and families doing what is right for them to set them up to find the right college fit. Awesome. The next bullet point of what we're going to talk about is, okay, you've heard this term dead period. There's a dead period right now. No coaches are out recruiting. What can student athletes do to impact their recruiting right now? This is an area that I really want to focus some time and energy, because we believe very firmly that student athletes are drivers in their recruiting process, and sitting back and being passive is not the option that we hope student athletes go for. So we're going to focus on 4 areas in which student athletes can make strides over the next couple months: physical development, in-game and baseball development, academics and standardized test prep, and then explicit to the recruiting process. Of course, these first 3 also impact the recruiting process. The best way to ensure a good recruiting outcome is to get better and better at baseball, be the best academic and baseball product that you can be for a college coach. But specifically in that, we're going to talk about some sports profiles, some online profiles, as well as coach communication as well. Throughout this entire piece of what student athletes can do, there are these 4 kind of keywords or key phrases that I want us to focus on and kind of keep coming back to, and we will keep coming back to: motivation, discipline, proactivity, and ask for help. The key thing behind these is that in a normal year, when you are in season with your high school baseball team and attending class in a physical way instead of a digital or remote way, a lot of these things are more organically provided to 15, 16, 17-year-olds. You have the coach holding you accountable and motivating you and keeping you on schedule. You have the teacher who's asking you if you need support or need any extra help on a test or a paper or whatever it is. But right now, given the remote learning paradigm, given that you aren't going through a typical baseball season where you have other support structures around you, implementing these type of routines and disciplines on you as a student athlete, it's important to create them internally so that you can still make the same impact and make the same strides in your recruiting that you could otherwise without these other support structures. You still have some great support structures, and we'll talk about them, but it's more important. It's incredibly important always, but now more than ever, that student athletes start to develop and think through these 4 keywords to make sure that they are making strides in their recruiting right now. First up on physical development, first and foremost, the best thing that you can do right now is stay healthy. Stay healthy. It's a really important thing for you to do. You can't continue to make strides if you are sick or if you get injured. So listening to your body, following the guidelines of what you're hearing on the news and everything else like that to make sure that you are staying safe and healthy, you and your family are staying safe and healthy, is the number one thing. Because if you are unable to train, then you will be standing still, right? The best way to come out ahead of where you in 3 months come out ahead of where you are is just to keep moving forward, and you don't want anything to stop you in your tracks or move you backwards. So staying healthy, really important piece of that. Second is continuing home workouts. There's this great Tim Corbin quote that I'll flip to here. He was asked in an interview, what are your student athletes focused on? He said, number one, their priority is going to be their academics because they're still in school. Number two, they're with their family. And number three is just to take care of their mental and physical health while they're home. And what does that look like? Well, it might not look like much really in terms of the places that they can go, but it shouldn't paralyze them. They can do a lot of primitive things. There's a lot of things you can do with your body if you move it outside and if you got some creativity. That is so crucial. Defending national champions, incredibly high level of baseball performers, one of the best coaches in the country, if not the best collegiate coach in the country. And he's saying, yes, you do not have access to the same things that you would. If you're at Vanderbilt right now, you're playing an incredibly competitive schedule. You have access to some of the best trainers and weight rooms and facilities in the entire free world. But just because you don't have those things doesn't mean that you can't make strides. Which brings us to this third bullet point, which is keep it simple and get creative. No, right now you don't have access to the gym, the weight room, the squat rack, the full rack of dumbbells, whatever it is that you believe you need. You don't have access to the force plate to measure your output or the leg press. So what? There are still things that you can do that are more simple, that work within those restraints to continue to develop so that you are doing something. If you don't have a squat rack at home, see if you can find a dumbbell and do goblet squats. If you don't have a dumbbell to do goblet squats, find a hill and do hill sprints. There's a whole range of things. And I think it's really important to remember that baseball players, student athletes did not always have access to the things that we do now. And the things that we have access to now are incredible, and they can really help you move forward in a very data-driven, feedback-oriented way. But you don't need them to keep making strides. You can get better with very simple things, and it's important that right now those are the things that you are focused on. Be creative within your restraints, keep it simple, and just do anything that you can to get better. Bodyweight exercises, minimalist equipment exercises, whatever the case may be, whatever you can do, focus on that. It's also important to note here that you don't need to reinvent the wheel. You don't need to build from the ground up or build from scratch a baseball-specific bodyweight workout. Those exist. There are social media resources, there are internet resources that you can be pointed to, that you can find and uncover and say, oh, this is exactly what I was looking for. I don't need to go, get a PhD in physical training or, muscular physiology. I just need to find the right resources and then use them to my advantage. So being simple with it, being creative, but also calling upon and recruiting the resources that you need can really help set you up to keep making strides in your physical development, even when you don't have access to the things that you're used to. Next up is in-game and baseball development. Typically right now, you'd be practicing for 3 or 4 hours a day. You'd be in the hitting tunnel. You'd be having games. You'd be on the road. You'd be doing a lot of different things, right? Again, you don't have access to that stuff. So what can you do? The answer is there's still a lot that you can do right now to get better at the game of baseball. A couple key points that I point to here. One is gamifying your reps whenever and however possible. And by this, I mean make them fun and interesting so that you stay invested and involved and you are giving your all, but also gamify them in the sense that it's not just always a routine grounder, or it's not always just the ball on the tee. How do you make your reps more game-like and more difficult to challenge yourself to grow during this time? I think that this idea of maintenance versus growth right now, you want to do both, but if you're able to gamify your reps, you can actually not just come out and say, okay, I didn't lose any ground in my baseball while everything was shut down, but actually I came out ahead because of the way that I approached my reps. I was intentional. I introduced the proper feedback loops. I introduced desirable difficulty to make it a steeper learning curve and really make my reps more impactful. Focus on how you can do that. Don't just do the regular soft toss and pummel the back of the hitting tunnel or pummel the tarp that you set up in your backyard or garage. Do a 2-ball drill to mix in something that looks like an off-speed pitch or something that makes it harder for you, that makes it more game-like. The second bullet here, and this is something that I shamelessly stole from a mentor of mine from when I coached up at Phillips Andover. He was my coach in college for a year, and he would say, my freshman year I was out of the bullpen, and he would say, stay ready to get ready and get ready to stay ready. Kind of a circular line of reasoning, but the idea here being that right now you can set yourself up to be ready to get ready when everything lifts. The work that you do now is going to set the table for whenever everything clears up and you're able to get back in the field playing live games, back to your hitting facility, whenever that is, whether it's June, July, August, May, whatever it is, the work you do now will set you up to really hit the ground running then. So stay ready to get ready to stay ready. Another really important piece that I think sometimes goes overlooked in kind of a year-round sport and the appetite for development that student athletes have, especially in baseball, which I think is very admirable. But now's a really good time to build in rest periods and make sure that you're staying healthy as well. One thing that we say at Head First is obstacles open opportunities, or the obstacle's the way. Yep. It's devastating that you guys aren't on the field playing your full high school season or getting ready in an effective way for the travel ball season coming up this summer. But the opportunity that this opens is that pitchers who typically by the time they arrive at a perfect game tournament or at an honor roll camp in August have thrown hundreds of innings, you're going to be a little bit more well rested. So you're going to be getting your band work and your long toss in to make sure that when that time comes, you are healthy up until that point when the eyes are on you. So as you're doing this with everything, and this is important, again, this is not unique to this situation or to a spring that is shut down. This is always the case, but right now you have a really good opportunity to build in these rest periods really intentionally and take some time off from what you are doing in a programmed and intentional way so that you can stay healthy later on down the road when, the reps in front of college coaches matter and carry a bit more weight. Fourth bullet, you'll see this in bold a lot. This is one thing that we'll say again. Keep it simple, get creative. We work with a company called Blast Motion that sells sensors that attach to the knob of your bat and measure things like attack angle and rotational force delivered and everything else like that. Really good data-driven feedback loop that's really simple to use. You can see here just how simple. This is a 2-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn. Those of us who live in New York know just how small some of those apartments can be. And this is a student athlete, a high school student athlete who set up in his bedroom, tee, wiffle ball tied to a 3-pound weight, can still hit. So he's getting reps off the tee. He's not denting the wall, mom and dad. So it's, good in that. He's not breaking any windows. No ball in the house, doesn't apply here. But also he's using this blast sensor to get more data on his swing so that he can continue to develop. Now, you don't need that data. You don't have to have that sensor to do things like this, to keep it simple and get creative and to continue to develop your game. It can be sitting in the living room and working a tennis ball off the wall or outside, mom and dad, sorry, off the outside of the house, just working your backhand fundamentals, working your backhand technique over and over and over. You don't have to have all the things that you're used to be able to keep making strides. There's a lot of really simple things that you can do if you get creative and think about the foundational skills of the game that you can then work to build on. Another area that we would encourage student athletes to focus right now is academics and standardized test prep. I know that it's very different being in a Zoom classroom than it is being in an actual classroom, but it is really important that student athletes keep your foot on the gas in the classroom. Even if your school has transitioned to pass fail or isn't giving grades for this semester or whatever, the work that you do now ultimately will matter not just for barely scraping by and getting the pass instead of the fail for the spring semester, but next semester. In the fall, guess what? That math work from next fall is going to build on the stuff that you're doing right now. So keeping your foot on the gas in the classroom is really important to set you up for success through this, because ultimately the transcript that you hand off to a coach or is part of your application, your admissions folder, is going to be impacted by the work that you're doing now. Yes, admissions departments are going to look at a pass fail in a little bit different way. And they're going to understand that transcripts have been affected by schools being shut down due to coronavirus. But if you keep your foot down now, you're going to set yourself up for success later on, both with the habits you build for next year in school, but also college, where guess what? You have a bit more independence and you need to create some of the structure more for yourself because it isn't given to you from without in the same way. But also that transcript in next fall, next spring is going to build on top of the stuff that you're doing right now. In the vein of obstacles open opportunities, the other thing that we would encourage you to take a look at is use the time that you otherwise would be at baseball practice or, driving that 2 hours to an away game in the middle of the week. Reinvest some of that time to double down on standardized test prep. In addition to your schoolwork, not a replacement for your schoolwork, but if you are able to create some more hours in your day, this is a really good way to reinvest it. Standardized test prep or standardized test scores rather, for better or for worse, are an important piece of your recruiting and your admissions profile. It's not the be all end all. It doesn't say if you're a good or bad person. It's not a statement on your character, but a standardized test score is just that. It is standardized across the country. And so it's an excellent way, and it's the quickest, cleanest way for a recruiting college baseball coach to walk up to you and get a decent sense of where you might fall academically. Yes, they're absolutely going to look at your transcript and your GPA and what APs you're taking and what honors classes you're in. They want to see all that, and that is very, very important. The standardized test scores give them a very quick and dirty metric and say, here's where this kid falls. And I know that a kid with X ACT or Y SAT typically does pretty well in my admissions department if they are supported by the right transcript and have the right profile and all these other sorts of things. So for better or for worse, it is an important way because it can give coaches a very quick sense of where you might fall in their recruiting class. When it comes to academics and staying on top of it in the classroom, build a routine and stick to it. You're not getting up at the same time, maybe. You're not commuting to school. You don't have after school practice. You don't have the team study hall. You don't have these external structures and routines in the same way that you would during a typical school year. So student athletes, and with the support of parents, it's on you to build this out for yourself. You have to be motivated to find this routine, build it for yourself in a way that is sustainable and that works for you, and then also have the discipline to stick to it. And this is a really key place where that motivation, discipline, and proactivity really start to come to a head and really matter. They matter across all of these, but this is one where if you're able to build a routine and stick to it, you're going to set yourself up for success. It also turns out that that's a really important skill in college and beyond as well. So it's not wasted effort. It's not unique to being in high school during a pandemic or during remote learning to really have this function to your advantage. Next, we're going to talk about the recruiting process. And this I kind of split out into 4 bullet points under this bullet point. I kind of cheated a little bit with a nested hierarchy. The way that we're thinking about in this presentation, the recruiting process right now is these four pieces: school research and list building, coach communication, building out your online profile and video, and then planning for your summer recruiting circuit. So first up is school research and list building. Just as you have a little bit more time, or you might be able to create more time in your day with the right structures to do some extra SAT prep or ACT prep, you also have a lot of time to be able to create for yourself to do the research that is necessary for you to find the right school. This is something that spring sport athletes, I quite frankly think, are at a bit of a disadvantage with. The summer recruiting season is heavy across all sports. But if you're in a fall sport and you're not in season in the spring, you have the spring to get all your ducks in a row with the research and the coach communication and all these things to set the table for your summer recruiting season. As a baseball player, you typically wouldn't have that in the same way, but guess what? Now you do. So take advantage of that. When you are doing this, focus on school qualities. Focus on things like size, setting, geography, what's the area of academic strength, how far away from home is it, these things rather than the labels, whether it's SEC, ACC, D1, D3, Ivy League, NESCAC, whatever it is. When we talk about finding the right school and building the list for you, the qualities of the school are ultimately what impact your experience in that college much, much more than whether it's this or that label that somebody has attached to it. For example, to use, not to pick on them, but to use the Ivy League as an example, if you walk up to me at camp and you say, Coach McKenna, I'm interested in Ivy League schools, what you are saying to me is that you are just as interested in a school in the heart of Manhattan with 6,000 or 7,000 kids and some robust graduate programs, Columbia, and a school of about 3,000 or 4,000 that's on the border of New Hampshire and Vermont that doesn't even really have that big a town next to it, Dartmouth. Those are incredibly different experiences that have both been lumped together in this athletic conference. So thinking about it from an athletic conference standpoint doesn't set you up to find the right fit because you're thinking and equally considering all these different options that are incredibly different. And Dartmouth is a great school and offers the perfect fit for some kids. Columbia, great school, offers the perfect fit for other kids. I think that there are very few kids who are going about this honestly and going through the recruiting college process saying, I will be equally happy at Dartmouth and Columbia because they are so incredibly different in the experience that they offer to student athletes. So think about this from qualities and then start to match that back against the schools that might make their way onto your list. Start with, I want to go to a school that is roughly 3,000 to 5,000 kids. I would love it to be a drive, but not too short a drive from home. I like the weather in Southern California, and I'm looking at studying engineering. Use that list of qualities to then match against schools that fit that profile rather than vice versa. That's what I encourage. And doing this with an open mind can actually lead you to the third bullet here, which is you find the fit or match schools that you know of, and then you can broaden your search to look for other schools that look a lot like those schools, but that you didn't know of before. I grew up outside Boston. I went to Washington University in St. Louis on a visit, and that is how I found out about Amherst College. They're not even that similar, but like that is how these things open, or how some of these doors open. If you are saying, I want to go to a NESCAC school, you aren't considering Grinnell College, which has a lot in common with some of these NESCAC schools. Small, liberal arts, a few hours away from a fairly major city, but because it's in the Midwest and not in this athletic conference, you might have closed yourself off to that. But if you say, I'm looking for a school of 2,000 to 3,000 with a liberal arts focus that's 2 hours outside of a city, then you can equally consider these schools that offer that type of experience. Coach communication. And this comes down to, again, the time in the day that you have right now that you wouldn't necessarily have when you're in season. Using this to communicate with coaches can be really, really, really productive. Just as you have a little bit more time in the day and are looking for ways to fill it, so do college coaches. Right now, they can't be off-campus recruiting. They aren't coaching the season as they normally would be. They are spending hours in their inbox and on digital profile platforms to try to, jumpstart and kickstart some of their recruiting efforts. So right now is the perfect time to be in touch with them. To be effective in your communication with college coaches, I would focus on these 3 Ps. Personalize the note, proofread the note, and be proactive. When it comes to personalizing, you should personalize it to the coach, the program, and the school, which again means doing your research. If you're going to reach out to Coach Noon at Babson and you've done your research, you're able to say in that note, Coach Noon, I'm really interested in Babson because I think that the entrepreneurship program is exactly what I'm looking for, and I think it is the perfect fit. I looked at the required classes that you have to take. I looked at some of the outcomes. I looked at some of the next steps the kids are taking, and I am just so juiced up about this entrepreneurship program. That is a great, great email to write to Coach Noon because guess what? It demonstrates very clear interest in his school. It doesn't say, on the generic side, Dear coach, I'm really interested in your school because it's a great school. That doesn't say that you have a genuine interest in a program. And just like student athletes want to be recruited by coaches who are genuinely interested in them, coaches want to get that interest from student athletes as well. Interest is a two-way street, and it's really important that you express that interest effectively over the course of your communication. Doing your research and personalizing that note is a really, really good way to do it. Proofread. I cannot tell you how many times I've had a conversation with a college coach where he says, Max, I got 25 emails this past week and 20 of them were addressed to the wrong coach. Or they just said, dear coach. Or they said, dear coach, and then indicated that it was the wrong school or the wrong mascot or the wrong nickname, or they were interested in a major that we don't have. Personalize it, but then also you have to proofread this. You have to check to make sure that the email address matches the coach name in the salutation, matches the school name, matches the major that you're talking about. All of it lines up. And mom and dad, this is where you can be a lot of help to student athletes, because while it is crucial that these emails be written by and come from student athletes themselves, you can be a great resource in proofing these touch points and making sure that they, all the ducks are in a row. Now, a college coach who spends his life recruiting 16, 17, 18-year-olds can tell the difference between an email that a 16-year-old wrote and an email that a practicing lawyer wrote. So it's important to stop at the proofreading phase and not go into the rewriting or writing phase for your student athlete. But again, second set of eyes on something always helps. And these are really important touch points that you have with these coaches. So please, if you're going to take the time to email a coach, take the time to personalize it and take the time to proofread it. Proactivity. We have been talking about this all night. There's no guarantees to successful outcomes in the recruiting process, but if I were to point to one word that would most set you up for success in it, it would be proactivity. This is always an important piece of the puzzle for trying to secure a recruiting outcome of finding a great school for you and a great baseball experience for you at the next level. But it's especially important right now because you aren't getting the same organic opportunities. You aren't out playing where you might happen across a coach. You can't just go pop onto a campus that's nearby to watch a team play. So you have to be more intentional and more proactive with your outreach. And this means, yes, email is going to be a really important piece of the puzzle for you, but coaches get a lot of emails. And while personalizing it and being proactive and being persistent with it is a great way to start to stand out, it's also important that you try to contact them in other platforms and on other channels as well. Send them a handwritten letter. While inboxes, mailboxes used to be stuffed full of stuff and you got very few emails, now it's the complete reverse, right? How many handwritten notes do you get from people? You can stand out to coaches if you write that note. You can stand out to people if you create a curated Instagram page or Twitter account where you are demonstrating the hard work that you're doing and your commitment to your studies, your commitment to the game you love, all these things. Engage with your target programs on social media. Give them a follow, throw them a comment, give them a like, give them that double tap. All these things, being proactive and thinking about this as a channeling exercise to some degree, where a lot of your efforts are going to go into email because it's the most accessible, it's free, it's all these great things, but also how else are you touching bases with coaches? Are you picking up the phone and calling them? Once you have a certain depth of relationship and you've kind of gotten the go ahead from them, are you texting them on a semi-regular basis to check in? So being proactive and thinking about how can I get in touch with these coaches in an effective way is a really, really important piece of the puzzle. One thing that can help you streamline your coach communication is building out an online profile and equipping it with video. If you're going to send an email to a college coach and you don't have an online profile, you're going to need to look for the transcript attachment, the test score attachment, your video attachment, or a link to YouTube. So it's going to be an email that is personalized, is proofread, is going to the right coach, but also has these 4 attachments and these 3 links at the bottom of it. And, oh, by the way, that transcript that I sent you a few weeks ago is now out of date. Here's my newest one. It can be a lot to keep track of. So you can gain efficiency by having it all centralized in one place. we've partnered new this year with a company called Sports Recruits that offers a free service for building out your online profile. They also have some paid options that come with kind of more increased functionality, but you can create essentially a landing page for yourself where instead of attaching the transcript and the test scores and the video and the X, Y, and Z to every email that you send to a coach, you just include one link at the bottom. And at that link, you know that it's up to date because you only have to go one place to update it and make sure that it has the newest transcript, has the newest test score, has the email address that you're using and that you're checking most regularly, has the updated video. Everything can live in one place. And so instead of taking that time to track down all those attachments and PDFs and all those links, reinvest that time in personalizing the note and make it simple on yourself to consolidate all your information in an up-to-date way. An important piece of this is also video. Coaches right now are watching a lot of video because they cannot be off-campus recruiting. They are getting emails, they are emailing players, but they are also on profiles like Sports Recruits and on platforms like that looking for kids, looking for video. So include video on your profile if you have it at all, even if it's old video, if it's from early this spring or from a winter workout or from last summer, put it up there. Put it on there with the dates the coaches know when it is from, because it still can help coaches get a better sense of you as a player. Yes, they're going to want to see you live and they want to know your transcript and they want to know your 60 time and they want to know your batted ball velocity or your throwing velocity, but they also can get a good sense of your mechanics and your fundamentals from watching you on video. And when it comes to video, I think that there sometimes can be a barrier of it seeming very difficult. It doesn't have to be. Sure, I'm sure you've all seen some recruiting videos that are incredibly high production value that cost hundreds or thousands of dollars to make. These don't have to be that. This is something that with an iPhone and then maybe a tripod or maybe just a willing, steady-handed friend, you can film yourself getting hacks off a tee, doing some front toss, doing soft toss, throwing a bullpen, even if it's not a full 60 feet, 6 inches. Capture some of this now, and you can do it well enough well and simple enough with an iPhone to give coaches a good sense of your mechanics. Yes, they're still going to want to see you live later on down the road, and yes, you might need to at some point invest in some video that's a little bit more professional or game film or whatever it is, but this can give you a really, really good head start. And this is also another important piece why we work with Sports Recruits is that they have a built-in video editor where you can cut together clips from different videos, and it really minimizes the work that you have to do. You don't have to know Final Cut Pro. You don't have to know iMovie to be able to do this. If you do, great. You can add in some fades and some transitions, and that's great. But you don't have to. And so it makes this much more frictionless and much less of an obstacle for student athletes to be able to get this video on there because it is so important for what coaches are looking for. And then finally, what student athletes can be doing right now is thinking about your summer recruiting plan and also building in flexibility. It's almost guaranteed that the summer schedule that you and your travel program and your parents built out in November, December, January, your summer isn't going to look like that because of everything going on. There are going to be changes that come about. So thinking about how you are going to adjust your plan for getting the right exposure and how you can build in this flexibility is really important. And also focusing on the right things this summer is something that I think can really help you. And you see some of them there. It's efficiency in targeting the right schools and getting exposure to the right schools is always important, but it's even more important now when it's looking more and more likely that the summer recruiting calendar is going to be truncated. It's going to be shorter than it usually is. So you have to be more efficient. You have to consider efficiency, not just in seeing 200 schools, but how many of those schools might be the right fit for you or fit some kind of profile that suit your needs the next level. So think about how you are gaining efficient exposure, guaranteed exposure to a high volume of schools, not just high volume of schools, but a high volume of the right schools and thinking about it from that perspective. Also, getting access to data analytics and video this summer will be more important. This is something that we talked about on a recent interview that we did with Coach Chris Gordon from Duke, an assistant coach at Duke, and we talked to him about, hey, what is the role during this recruiting cycle that you see data analytics video playing? And he he thinks it's going to be more, especially for their staff where they use data and analytics and video very heavily with their player development and recruiting. They are looking for this because their recruiting cycle is going to be a bit shorter and have to have a quicker turnaround for players. And so they have to get a really good picture of a kid and gain some deep insight into a ball player before they commit him. And one way to do that is to buttress all of the in-person recruiting that they're able to do with things like data analytics and video to give them just more in-depth knowledge of a kid's tools and how they're able to perform and how they are projecting them as a student athlete into the Duke baseball program. And this is true across the board. Coaches want a holistic picture of you, just as you are seeking a holistic picture of a school. And so, yes, watching you play is really important, but so is having the data, the analytics, the video, the transcript, the test scores, the getting to know you, getting to meet your parents and get a sense of who you are and your character and culture fit for their program. It's this 360-degree view that they need to be able to make a comfortable decision in their recruiting, and getting access to data and passing that along to coaches can help them reach that comfort level much more quickly and more completely. Another thing here is proactivity. Unsurprisingly, we'll continue to hit on this one. Whereas in a normal summer, just going about your regular travel ball schedule might get you some amount of organic exposure, it's more important that you seek out this exposure this summer because, again, your summer schedule is going to look different than you thought it was going to. So are coaches' summer schedules. So is your travel ball summer schedule. So being proactive in not just saying, I'm going wherever the winds take me, and hopefully I get some exposure along the way. Being more intentional, proactive, and efficient in targeting the right schools is going to be more important than ever. Last thing here is the role of school-specific camps in this recruiting cycle. School-specific camps play a really important piece of the recruiting puzzle for programs because they give you a great way to see the whole coaching staff, get on campus, meet some of the guys in the program, and also, really crucially, getting follow-up and repeat exposure. So this summer, this is even more important for that fall winter timeframe where you might not have the chance to see a coach 2, 3, 4, 5 times over the summer because it might be a more limited window. So how are you getting that repeat exposure on their campus in the fall or winter? So after you get a wide variety of exposure to schools that all could be the right fit, you narrow it down from 35 potential fit schools to 10. You see them somewhere else and you narrow that 10 to 5, and then you really zero in on those 5 programs and can build a plan for the fall and winter where you're getting onto those campuses. Additional resources before we turn it over to the Q&A. As I mentioned, these are some of the places that we go to for some of the things that we need to know about the recruiting space and things that are a little less outside of our area of expertise, like standardized testing. So one key resource is us. We love being a resource for families. We love putting stuff up on our social media and on our blog that we believe can help families. And so check out our blog, check out our social media feeds on Twitter and Instagram to get a sense of what we're posting, when we're posting, and to stay informed and stay on top of what's going on. Recently, we did a series of 10 to 15-minute videos about how coronavirus is impacting recruiting. What does a dead period mean? What can student athletes do during a dead period? And also interviews with the Duke assistant coach. We're working on a couple more interviews with our friends in the college coaching ranks. So stay in touch with that to get a good sense of kind of how we're thinking about it. And if there's anything that you would like to see covered on that, let us know. Throw us a comment, throw us a reply on Twitter, and we can certainly take that into account. Another really great resource specifically for Division I goings on is d1baseball.com, and their Twitter account is great. They offer a subscription service where you can get all their articles, but also you'll get a lot of updates if you just follow at D1Baseball on Twitter. You can get a good sense of what the space is looking like. They were the ones who had some of the earliest access to what the NCAA Division I Council was going to decide, because they have some great relationships with those types of Power Five schools. They are texting the Mississippi State coach or the Michigan coach to get a sense of what's going on in those meetings. And so they offer a really good resource to stay on top of the NCAA and Division I baseball happenings and developments. There's also no better source to know about your target programs than by following your target program. So if you're interested in Amherst, go on to Instagram, go on to Twitter, follow Amherst Baseball, but also follow the school, follow the admissions department if they have one, follow some of the other teams and see what they're doing. This will keep you up to date with what might be happening specific for them. And also it gives you a chance to go back to some earlier points to engage with them on social media. So stay in touch with your target programs on social media as well, and that will give you a really good way to stay on top of what they are doing. When it comes to standardized testing and admissions and, are the June SAT dates canceled? As of today, they are. Are when are they rescheduling them for? All these things. A resource that we go to are our friends over at Compass Test Prep. Compass was founded by an honor roll family, actually an honor roll dad, whose son is headed to Rochester next year. Great family. And they have some incredible resources on staying up to date with standardized testing and admissions. So if you go to that resource center page, they have a blog post that they are updating weekly, if not daily, with what is the most what is the latest development in the testing space. They also did a webinar last Monday, so a week and a half ago, where they had some college counselors on, they had some college admissions folks on to talk about testing in this kind of coronavirus era and what it means with testing centers closed and limited access to testing and tests being canceled. What are the trends you're seeing at the college level, and how do you stay on top of them? When it comes to baseball and drill work, we mentioned, I don't think that you guys as student athletes need to reinvent the wheel. One great resource that I would put you in touch with is the ABCA, which is the American Baseball Coaches Association. They have a Twitter account where they post drills and interviews with the coaches, and they just started this thing where every Tuesday night they're doing what they call ABC at home. And last night it was a panel with some pro coaches, some college coaches, talking specifically pitching and pitch development. So really interesting talk, but also some really educational stuff and some really good resources for you to use if you're thinking, okay, I got limited space, I got limited equipment, what can I do with my body, what can I do with my game to continue to develop? That's a really good place to start. This is also where that ask for help keyword that we touched on earlier comes into play. A great resource for you is going to be the coaches around you as well. Go to your travel coach, go to your high school coach, go to your hitting or pitching instructor, and engage them in the conversation. Say, hey coach, I cannot stand still during this. I need to continue to develop. What do you have in terms of a drill for X? I have a baseball, a glove, and 3 rocks. What can I do with them? And they can start to think through and help you develop a plan of attack for the physical development, but also for the baseball side of things as well. So ask for help, recruit the networks and the resources around you, whether that is on the internet, on social media, or the coaches that you know firsthand as well. Now we're going to turn it over to the Q&A. To get your question, to ask your question, what you can do is find the questions tab over in the GoToWebinar toolbar, type right in there, fire away. We're going to answer as many questions as possible over the next little bit, and we will stick around until they're all answered. If you have to go, or if you have a more personal follow-up question, feel free to throw it in that and then leave, go about your evening. We'll be in touch over the next couple days to make sure that you get an answer to that. And while we turn it over to the Q&A, I'm going to leave it on this page so you have some of these resources. You can start to check them out. I also included down here at the bottom our contact information as well. We would love to continue to be a resource for families, whether it's by email, by phone, give us a call. We have a live chat feature on our website. So if you have a quick question about what happened with X, Y, or Z camp, pop on our website, type right there in the corner, and we'll get back to you as soon as possible, whether it's right then or it'll generate an email to us and we can follow up as well. So want to make sure we're getting the questions answered that you guys have in the format that can best help you. Kevin, I'm going to turn it over to you to MC these questions now.
Thank you, Max. And sorry for leaving you alone during most of this presentation, but for everyone else on this webinar, thank you so much for the really thoughtful questions and for sticking with us. It seems like a lot of you have similar thoughts, so that helps a lot with the Q&A, and we can address them here to all these themes that everyone has on their mind. We can kind of get into the nitty gritty. Max, one of the ones that's been coming up a lot recently is what information should you include in your outreach to coaches? Should you wait until you have video ready? And is there an age that is too young to start that outreach?
Great series of questions. What to include? I would include everything that you have access to so that you can give them a succinct, and so not like running onto 3 pages of typed out email, but giving coaches as much as possible. This doesn't mean that you need to give them your elementary school report card, but it means that you want to include test scores and your objective measurements, your 60 time, your batted ball velocity, your fastball velocity, include your transcript, include the stuff that they need. Oftentimes you can get some kind of a cheat sheet in what a specific program might need. If you go on their website and you look at their recruiting questionnaire, first of all, you should go on to their website and fill out their recruiting questionnaire, because then you will get emails from them about their fall prospect camp or an update from their schedule, whatever it is. So do that anyway. But then also the fields that you see there are the sorts of things that they want to stay in touch with. You should not wait on video before you email coaches, but it can be hugely additive. And so it's important to understand that it should not be an obstacle to you contacting a coach, but also the obstacles to getting appropriate and effective video are not as high as a lot of student athletes and families tend to think. And so that's kind of the message that I want to leave there is get video whenever you can. It's not as difficult as it feels or seems sometimes, but also don't wait on that before you contact a coach for the first time, especially if you're on the younger end of the spectrum. Age of contact. So this is a question that is really interesting because there are technical, there are guidelines from the NCAA that says, they say if you are a student athlete who has not yet reached September 1st of your junior year, you cannot have recruiting specific conversations with college coaches. So this does not mean that you can't email them. You still should email them, but it means that the email that you're going to get back from a Division I coach, if you're a 2023 right now or a 2022 right now, is going to be a form email that says, "Dear Max, thank you for your interest. Because you are a 2022, we are unable to have a recruiting conversation with you, but here are our camp dates." And so that is the reality of some of that. It doesn't mean that coaches aren't looking at your transcript or looking at your video or filing that email away for future use. It just means that their hands are tied in terms of how they can reach back out to you depending on what age you are. So never too young to reach out to coaches. Just understand that they are governed by things that might restrict what they're able to send back to you depending on your age.
Great. And Max, who do you recommend reaching out to if there's not like a specific recruiting coordinator for the program?
So great question. I would reach out to really probably as many people on the staff as you can. I would reach out to anybody you can find an email address for. Sometimes you will see that they'll have just a baseball inbox and it'll be baseball@babson.edu. Email that if you need to. I would include the coaching staff on those communications, especially the recruiting coordinator is one that is going to be oftentimes filing a lot of this stuff away. But I wouldn't be shy or bashful. I would include them on one email and just say, "Hey coaches," acknowledging that you're emailing more than one of them, just so you're not sending the same email to the head coach, to the recruiting coordinator, to the assistant coach, like sending them all the same note separately. Just put them all in one thread and reach out to them so that you aren't missing any of your bases.
Great. And Max, so kind of circling back to a question from earlier, I know we got some good information on, the perfect game. The PG prospect of taking a post grad year. With reclassifying specifically, I know that is still very unique to each family, and it's going to depend on the ball player's goals and the situations. But it did come up a couple times, so I wanted to see if you had any advice for student athletes who are considering reclassifying.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it is a really, really good option for a lot of kids. It's not the perfect option for everybody. Um, and there's a lot of really good reasons to do it. Um, Things like allowing another year for physical development, maturity, strengthen the transcript. These are all really good things. I think that the the consideration isn't just a will this post grad year set me up for a different recruiting outcome 1 year from now, but it's more, will this post grad year be additive to my experience right now and in the future? Will this post grad year not just be a way of waiting and trying to wait out the process and get another bite at the apple, so to speak, in recruiting, but is it something that is going to be valuable? Is it going to help me develop as a human being? Does it give me a little bit more incremental independence and autonomy so that when I move out of mom and dad's house into college, it's not complete culture shock? It can do all those things. It can really set kids up as kind of a halfway house for high school kids transitioning to college. Like it's still a high school, so you're with younger kids and there are more structure, but if you're boarding in a PG program, you also do have more autonomy. Mom and dad aren't looking over your shoulder when you're doing your homework. So you have to create some of these structures, but you also still have more of a support network than when you show up freshman year of college. So I think that I would think of it holistically. What can a PG year experience deliver to me as a student athlete, not just what can it deliver in my recruiting, if I were to think about this. And there are some great programs across the country that do an incredible job developing players, developing human beings, and offering really cool academic experiences. I coached at one of them. I taught at Phillips Andover. I coached at Phillips Andover. They have a robust post-grad program. KG, Kevin Graber, runs a college level baseball program that has some post grads at the high school level. It's a remarkable experience for the kids for whom it is the right fit. But I think that it's more than just, does this advance my recruiting or am I playing good baseball? It's all these things.
Great. Max, going to SAT, ACT scores. I know we talked about this a little bit already.
Mm-hmm.
But in addition to tracking which of those tests are going to be canceled, what can families do to start getting more information on how schools are going to be adjusting to pass-fail grading, test optional, things like that?
Mm-hmm. So this is where I would point a lot of families towards that Compass Prep resources page. They are tracking as schools move to test optional. They actually had a big grid that had all the schools that recently had moved to test optional or test flexible since this pandemic started, and that is a really useful source in terms of looking at not just, oh, I hear a lot of schools are going to test optional, but are the schools I am looking at, are they transitioning? So I would put a lot of people in that direction. I would point people in that direction to stay in touch with cancellations, adjustments, also changes to how to prepare for them and strategies for preparing during this time, but also things like the role of standardized testing and admissions as well across the country.
Great. Max, shifting to our camps this summer for a minute, got a couple of questions. One, what is the status of our events? And two, can you introduce yourself to coaches prior to the event?
The short answer to the second part is yes. You absolutely can. We encourage, and Kevin and I actually have been working on a pre-camp curriculum to deliver to enrolled families before they ever step foot on campus at Baseball Heaven or in Woodland or whatever the case is, equipping student athletes and families with the tools to communicate with coaches before the event, build out their college list effectively before the event, and then once they step foot at one of our events, how can they take best advantage of those 2 days? So absolutely introduce yourself and be in contact with coaches before camp. It's a great idea. Understand that during the summer, coaches are on the road a lot. They're out there recruiting just as you are out there trying to get recruited. So you might not get a response to all the emails that you send, but that doesn't mean that they aren't filing them away. If you send a coach that says, dear Coach Carroll, I'm really excited to meet you at the honor roll camp in Woodland in late June. You might not get a reply, But when you show up and you go say hi to Todd Carroll, he's going to say, "Oh, I saw that you sent me an email. I'm sorry I didn't get to you. Great to meet you in person." For our events this summer, we are currently planning on running our events as scheduled. We are looking at a whole host of contingencies and tracking everything that is going on, both nationally and also in the jurisdictions in which we operate, and what the not just like the mandates from state governments are, but also the best practices on how to keep our families safe. We're planning on running right now. We're working on contingencies side by side with that. Understanding that the number one thing for us is the safety of our families, our college coaches, and our Head First staff. Nothing else is those are the non-negotiables, and so that is how we're approaching this. We also understand that financial flexibility right now is really important. So one thing that we are doing in light of this is we're offering if an event gets canceled, we are offering a full refund for families in that event. If we have to cancel it due to situation around the coronavirus. So we want to make sure that you have this risk-free option to sign up. We also have extended our deposit plans. You can reserve your spot right now for just $150 instead of paying the whole amount up front. Again, to give families this flexibility and really feel like you can reserve your spot and set the stage for the best recruiting experience you can have this summer, but also understanding that right now families need a bit more flexibility and there's a lot of uncertainty nationwide. And so keeping kind of all those different aspects in mind as we do.
Great, thank you, Max. Just kind of looking through some of the other questions here. Shifting a little bit outside of our events and a little bit into like some of the changes in recruiting now. Gotten a lot of questions about Ivy League programs, as we always do. Wondering about academic requirements there.
Meaning, like, what are the academic requirements at an Ivy League school?
Exactly, yep.
Gotcha. Oh man, I really feel bad saying it, but it really does depend on the program. It is going to be different at Harvard than it is at Columbia. It's going to be different at Brown. There's no kind of top-down thing that says to go to an Ivy League school, you need X GPA, Y course load, and Z standardized test score. It's not that clean. A couple resources that I would point you towards that are kind of some inside baseball on it. There's a book called Playing the Game by Chris Lincoln, an author named Chris Lincoln who played soccer at Dartmouth, who talks specifically about recruiting, athletic recruiting at the in the Ivy League. And it's a fascinating behind the scenes look at kind of the metrics they use and all these different things. But just as they purport to be doing, and just as we as student athletes and as teachers and coaches would like them to, they're considering the whole application and the whole student and whole student athlete. So it's not as simple as this minimum or this average, and if you meet the average, then you're in. There's a lot of other pieces, like how valuable can you be to the athletic department? What sport are you in? What is your test score versus your GPA versus your course load versus where you're coming from in the country? And they're looking for so many different kind of peaks and valleys in your application that there's a lot of different things that can really move it forward. The other book that I would take a look at, if you're in the mood for reading two books about college admissions or student athlete recruiting while you're not going out on the weekends, the other one that I would point to is a book called The Gatekeepers, which was a New York Times columnist who was embedded with the Wesleyan admissions department in the 1999 into 2000 admissions cycle. Also fascinating in terms of taking a look at the whole student. They talk a little bit about sports. That's more about the kind of general admissions process. But two great resources that I would point you towards, because it's not, the fact that there have been multiple books written about it does kind of point to the fact that it's not necessarily a super clear-cut answer. So not trying to dodge the question, but I'm sorry if I did.
Great. Another question that came in, and Max, I'll take this one really quickly, is when looking at those recruiting forms on their website, if you are on the younger end and don't have all that information, test scores notably, should you still fill it out? And the answer is yes. Coaches understand that you are a little bit younger in high school and that information is going to come later. That should not stop you from wanting to get on their radar. Similar to what we talked about with sending that email before you have video and then updating them later on. It's a similar concept there where you can use it as a touch point. They'll have your information already, they'll have some background on you, and you can let them know first when you take that test and get that score, and then if you retake it, if it improved, they'll love to see that you made progress. So I would say don't let that hold you back from getting on their radar and expressing interest to them.
Absolutely. And in that vein, I was reading something the other day. I think it was actually on Compass, not to continue to plug them, but they have some great resources. It's something like 70 or 75% of seniors take or retake their standardized test during the fall of their senior year. So as much as there's like, does early testing matter? Should I test early? Do I need to test early if I'm a student athlete? Maybe, and talk to the coaches at the schools that you're looking at, but just know that the standardized testing does also follow somewhat of a natural timeline. There are things in the math section of the SAT that you cover spring semester of junior year. So taking it before then, while you can prepare for it and you can maybe set yourself up for it, the natural kind of timeline for it does follow more towards the end of junior year, beginning of senior year. And so like keep that in mind. And coaches also know that they're not going to be recruiting a whole lot of first semester sophomores who have a solid SAT score. It's just not going to happen because they haven't covered that material to be able to be effective taking that test.
Max, another question that has come up a few times is about social media.
Yes.
So do you need to have a specific page, whether it's Instagram, Twitter, for your baseball recruiting, or can you use your personal one? And then secondly there, once you have an online profile, is social media an appropriate place to have that link and to deploy that?
Second answer, yes. I think that coaches absolutely do look at social media if they can find it. Because guess what? Of the scandals that might run through your mind about college athletics over the last couple of years, a lot of them started on social media, started with a dumb tweet or a dumb Instagram post. So coaches look for that because they understand that it can have ramifications in their program. And so they do look at your social media footprint and your profile. It doesn't have to be a dedicated one just for your recruiting. But what I would say is if you're looking at these types of schools, there's, for lack of a better word, you are branding yourself as a student athlete. It's a branding exercise where you want to have whatever social media presence you have, you want it to reflect your brand as a student athlete. That means that you should post about the things that you care about, that matter to you, and that you think kind of put you in a good position. It doesn't mean that it's only about baseball. It can be about baseball and your work ethic in the classroom and this, your Eagle Scout project that you're working on the side. Like that is a true picture of who you are. Just have it be authentic to who you are, but also have it be curated for a positive impact. Don't have it be a meme account, right? Like have it be something that is of value and paints a very clear picture of who you are as a student athlete that you would be proud to show this feed to your parents or to your grandparents.
Great. And sticking with the online recruiting profiles here for a minute, if all recruiting circumstances were normal this summer, how do coaches weigh, the in-person event versus the online recruiting profile? How do they balance those two items?
Yeah, so I think that it's a whole puzzle that has to go together for coaches. They're not just looking at the people that they see live. They're not just looking at the people they see on the internet. They're not just looking at fastball velocity. They're not just looking at 60 times. They're thinking about their recruiting class as a puzzle and then each player within it as kind of a smaller puzzle to make it up. So in-person recruiting is absolutely crucial for the vast, vast majority of programs, especially the high academic ones, because what that gives them is yes, they want to see you play. They need to see you play to make sure that, the way that you're like running a 6.7 60, but getting bad reads in the outfield, all of a sudden that 6.7 60 doesn't play very fast in a live game. So how do your tools translate to live gameplay is a really important piece of what they're looking at and why it's important to combine data, video, the profile with live recruiting events as well. The other thing is they want a sense of who you are holistically as a student athlete. Yes, They absolutely want kids who can contribute to their program and can help their program be successful on the field, win games, win championships. But they also want kids who are positive role models and positive leaders in the dugout, in the locker room, and on campus. So they have to be able to interact with you, get a sense of your character, get to know you as a student athlete, not just on the baseball field and how you play, but also how do you carry yourself off the baseball field? How do you interact with your parents, with other coaches, with teammates, with other players? What is your kind of, how do you carry yourself and what can your impact be on their team culture? Because these coaches, you're going to spend a lot of time with them. You're going to spend 40, 50 hours a week with them when you're in season over the next 4 years at a program that you commit to. They want kids who reflect their program positively on campus and also who they want to spend a lot of time with and believe can be a good impact and a good influence on the rest of the team culture as a whole, and the campus community as a whole as well. And that's where meeting a coach face to face, having these conversations, I just don't think it can be replaced by online profiles. I think that the two can combine to create something that is greater than the sum of its parts in terms of helping you create recruiting outcomes for yourself.
Great, Max. Another question that came in, which I think is something always on people's minds. Now with some more uncertainty in the recruiting process, is probably magnified a little bit. Seeing kids who are younger in high school saying that they have verbally committed to a Division I program. What does it exactly mean that they verbally committed, and does it mean that you are falling behind?
The second question, no, it does not mean that you are falling behind. There are some kids who are incredibly talented at the game of baseball, and that is known. And they're a freshman or sophomore throwing mid 90s. Yeah, they're going to get some early looks from some of these Power 5 type schools. You are not falling behind if you are not verbally committed, even though some of your classmates are. The bulk of the recruiting for high academic programs shakes out at the end of junior year and then the summer between your junior and senior year. Getting exposure before that can be incredibly productive so that you're on these coaches' radars. But when moves are made, especially at these high academic programs, is kind of during that summer. The timeline for committing a student athlete does depend a lot on how much pull or sway a program has in their admissions department. If you're a Power 5 school that won a national championship last year, for example, Vanderbilt, you have more pull if you're Tim Corbin in the admissions office than if you're Coach Bill Decker at Harvard, because baseball plays a different role in the campus community and in the athletic department at Vandy than it does at Harvard. So if you're being recruited to play at an Ivy League school or a Division III school, you need to be more in line with the general student body, and you need to have a more complete academic profile before that coach will walk your folder over to admissions, which oftentimes means at least 2.5 years of a high school transcript. So halfway through your junior year, they might be comfortable. If you have, stellar grades and have trended upwards and are taking the right courses, they might be comfortable walking that over. Or oftentimes at the end of junior year, when you have a full 3 years of a high school transcript and standardized test scores, if they're not a test optional school, then they can walk that over. So the timeline is different for high academic schools than it is for some of these Power 5s and the social media commitments, the perfect game commitment tracker that you take a look at. You're like, oh my God, how is this kid committed to Mississippi State? You're like, well, the answer is he's a 14-year-old who's 6'4" and runs a 6'5" 60 and hits the ball 500 feet. Yeah, that kid can commit to a Mississippi State early in a different way than Coach Tisch at Columbia can get a kid into Columbia.
Great. Max, we're going to go with about 2 more questions here. Still some questions coming in. For anyone who has not had their question answered yet or any others that pop up, you can still send them in and I will stay on and answer them. But just in the interest of being respectful of everyone's time, we'll wrap it up with 2 more here. The first one I will ask, which could be our fault for bringing up the question before, is it okay if kids are not using social media in their recruiting process?
100%. It can be useful. It is not necessary. It can be one more, like you can open up another front, so to speak, on engaging with college coaches and college programs. it's not necessary by any means. I think that if used responsibly, it can be good. Don't have to do it. I know that kids have a lot of other things going on, and creating a social media marketing platform for your student athlete in the recruiting process is, falls way below making sure the AP Calc homework is done. I totally get it. It's not necessary. It can be helpful. Ultimately, the best thing that you can do to advance your recruiting is be your absolute best on the field and be your absolute best in the classroom. The rest doesn't necessarily completely take care of itself. You still need to be proactive and not rely on just being found. But if you're going to bullet your ballot for just doing, two things really well, social media is not one of them. It's the baseball field and the classroom, and run full speed at those things. And you'll have that will be the best way to set yourself up, I would say.
Great, Max. And the final question here that we'll wrap up with, we've talked about a lot of different services tonight, our camps, sports recruits, and we know that players are also going to have private instructors and their own coaches. In terms of coaches or a recruiting service reaching out to college coaches on your behalf, we know that coaches probably prefer to hear from players so that they can get to know them a little bit more. But how do coaches view that outreach from those third parties?
Great question. So it probably does depend somewhat on the specific college coach and the relationship that they might have with a specific program, advisor, et cetera. By and large, college coaches want to hear from student athletes for a handful of reasons. One, that is who they're recruiting, right? They're recruiting to bring Kevin Keen into their program. They're not trying to bring Kevin Keen's advisor into the program and spend a lot of time with him in the dugout for 4 years. They care about engaging with you. And so that is really important. Also, they want to see genuine interest from the kid, as we talked about earlier. And a great way to demonstrate interest is to be in charge of your own communication. If you are sending emails, if you are calling coaches, if you are updating your profile and tagging and liking their stuff on social media, if you go that way, that is the stuff that demonstrates interest. So that's a really, really, really key piece. The other thing in terms of the perception of this outreach from third parties, whether it's an advisor or a travel coach or high school coach, one thing that I hear a lot that didn't occur to me before I had this conversation with college coaches is college coaches don't necessarily trust that somebody who says, "Hey, Coach Carroll, I have the perfect guy for MIT." The person recommending that kid for MIT might have seen MIT play baseball, but they also might not have. And so does the person saying who is recommending this kid to your program, do they actually have any idea of what it takes to play in your program? Or do they just have kind of a very general sense? So one thing we talked about earlier today is, as a high school coach, what can I do to be most helpful to my players? And the answer, I think, is watch as much college baseball as you can across as many different levels. Because if you are going to reach out to a college coach and say, "Hey, Coach McKenna, I have a guy who I really could fit at Amherst, or I really think could fit at Amherst and be helpful for your program," you better be pretty sure that kid that you're passing along is the right type of kid that Coach Pine at Amherst is looking for, that he has what it takes to play at that program. And if you don't know what that program looks like on the field, it's really, really hard. And I think it can come across as disingenuous to be reaching out to coaches and say, "Hey, coach, I have a player for you." And they're like, "Oh, really? Like, have you ever seen my program play? And do you know what I'm looking for? Do you know what it takes to play in my program? Like, do you have a picture of any of these things?" So if they have a relationship with that coach and they have that depth of knowledge of college baseball, then maybe it could be helpful. But again, I think that oftentimes it's perceived as not helpful because it's not the kid driving the process, and it's coming from someone who may or may not have any experience or knowledge in what this program is actually looking for.
Great, thank you, Max. And I think that's a good place to end the Q&A. Again, I know some of you still have questions in there. Some of them are a little bit more specific to individual cases. We're still happy to get to them. I'm going to stay online and answer some of them right now. I know we went a little bit past the hour, but if you did need to run off for whatever reason, we can answer the questions later as well. You see our contact information right there. We're also happy to reach out to you guys in case there's anything that we didn't get to live right now.
Thank you all so much for taking the time. Really great. Thank you for bearing with us for what was certainly a long webinar. We really appreciate the time. And if there's anything that we can do, always, please feel free to reach out. This is not, as Kevin mentioned, not the only time you have to get your questions answered. So feel free to ping us at any time. Thank you all so much for joining us.